Hey there, everybody. Larry here. I wanted to do a pretty short recording on knowledge work. It's an idea that gets tossed around a little bit, and it's particularly relevant, I think, now on two fronts. One is attention compass really is a knowledge worker operating system. I'll explain what I mean by that kind of towards the end of the video, but the idea is that attention compass is a way to deal with knowledge and information, and I use those two terms usually interchangeably. But in order to have a knowledge worker operating system, then we got to understand what a knowledge worker is. So we'll talk a little bit about attention compass and why I think it's important. But we'll also talk about the relationship between knowledge work and another hot topic of the moment, which is AI, artificial intelligence. So before we get into all that, let's just think for a minute about what knowledge work is. And I'll say generally, knowledge work is using your brain as a productive asset. Okay, your brain, your attention more precisely as a productive asset. So knowledge workers take knowledge in, they store it or process it or change it or add to it, and then it comes back out as information, right? So that's my definition of a knowledge worker, and I think it works pretty well. When you talk about knowledge work, you're talking about several maybe categories is a good way to understand what's going on, because it's not one thing. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we walk through these categories. Now, the categories are fine, but they're not bright lines, right? So there's no sense debating, oh, well, that doesn't belong in this category, it belongs in that category, because heck, it may belong in both. So as we think about knowledge work and we think about this information in, something happens to it and information out, we can begin to categorize what kinds of knowledge work we're talking about. And sort of the first kind of knowledge work in my mind is this factual knowledge. It's knowing, for example, that platypuses are venomous. Okay, so if you didn't know that, there you go. You're welcome. Value delivered for the day. But factual knowledge is really this factual circular definition. It's knowing facts. Okay, and a lot of times this has been very useful. It varies with the level of practicality of the knowledge, and that's practical is something that only we as individuals can judge whether or not this knowledge is practical for us. So Sherlock Holmes famously in one of the books, and this may be a legend story versus a factual story, but it makes the point, so I'll go with it. So Sherlock Holmes in one of the books says he's confronted with the idea that there are 9 planets in the solar system, or were 9 planets. I still don't know what's going on with Pluto. And the people he was talking to were very surprised that he didn't have this fact stored in his mind. And he explained that he could not comprehend a situation where that knowledge would be useful. And so he intentionally did not store it. And he famously talks about he felt his brain was like an attic. And if you collect too many things, then when you go up there to get something out, you can't find what you want, which, has a certain ring to it. So factual knowledge, how many planets are there in the solar system? A platypus is venomous, and it has these different levels of practicality. Unless you work in a zoo or go to Australia, it's not very practical to know that a platypus is venomous. On the other hand, as humans, we engage in small talk and in conversations, and occasionally you want to pop out a fact because it's surprising or interesting, or just to start a conversation, maybe. So that usefulness in my mind for factual knowledge is really fading. We now no longer ask each other questions, right? We go to Google. And so for all intents and purposes, I mean, unless you plan on being a Jeopardy contestant, right? Jeopardy is very much about factual knowledge. Then we can see where factual knowledge is not as important as it once was. Just like in my mind, being well read, is not as important as it once was. For conversation topics, what has your favorite celebrity done lately? It may be, right? But now that Google's on the front, and this is important, now that we've all adopted Google, it's really just not as useful as it once was. So the first kind is factual knowledge. The second kind is what I call process knowledge. So process knowledge is the understanding of mechanisms and methodologies for taking information over here and turning it into remanufactured or elaborated knowledge over here. And I tend to think of like a CPA when I'm talking about process knowledge. Because a CPA is somebody who understands the process of taking bookkeeping information and turning it into, say, managerial information, right? And they understand it so they can do it fairly quickly and easily, where somebody like me who doesn't understand that would have to labor over it for a long period of time, right? So that's kind of what I think of as process knowledge. Here, the spectrum is how routine is the process of turning knowledge into different knowledge, or information into different information. To the degree that that's a very routine process, then here's where we engage with computers in the sense of programming them, right? So if a calculation, say, is long, but it always works the same way, then computers have outcompeted humans on this kind of knowledge. Now, to the degree that there's variation, like with the CPA example, right, then you need a human to exercise some judgment over, is this an addition or a subtraction in this particular case, right? So our computers, our intelligence partners, have not completely conquered that part of knowledge work. So factual knowledge, process knowledge. The third is what I refer to as an understanding kind of knowledge. This may be referred to as wisdom. Okay, it has to do with understanding which process or tool is the best one to apply in a given situation. It's based in the other kinds of knowledge, but it supersedes them in some ways. And so more to do with decisions about, what process to follow. If you don't have this kind of knowledge, then you might easily fall prey to the problem of, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. Okay. And so that may help clarify what I'm thinking when I say, the understanding kind of knowledge. The fourth one I'll talk about is knowledge creation. Okay. And after I talk about knowledge creation, I'll talk about the one that's kind of not in this structure. Okay. I couldn't find a good place to fit it, so maybe you can. So knowledge creation has to do with, it may have some processes involved. You may have to understand which process to apply in which unique situation where you need to create new knowledge. You certainly have to have factual knowledge in the sense that you have to know kind of how far we've gotten with knowledge created before you start, right? But new knowledge is where I would classify, academics, right? Highest level academics, where there's research, highest level engineering, where there's new materials and we need to craft something here in order to be able to create the bigger thing that it's a component of, right? So that's my thought about knowledge creation. So we have these four categories. I'm going to list them again, and I'm going to tell you the one that's kind of left out of this structure. So there's factual knowledge, which is about facts. There's process knowledge, which is understanding when to vary a process under different constraints. There's understanding kind of knowledge, which is this wisdom, it's this experience, it's which tool is best for the situation, and not using the wrong tool for the wrong job, which, as we know, just often just creates a mess. And then there's this knowledge creation where it's actually new things that were not known before or not known precisely before. So what's the trick? What do we leave out? Well, embedded in all of these to some degree is problem solving. And it's certainly something that we do with our brains, right? 3 pounds of gray goo, right? But problem solving is really kind of a different thing. It may be that it underlies all of these different ideas. Problem solving is about knowledge, but it could be about creating new knowledge, right? Problem solving is often very much about just sheer tenacity and not giving up until the correct inspiration hits and the pieces seem to kind of fall in together. So we've kind of described knowledge work as these four things that seem to make sense, but there's this fifth one that kind of floats around and among all of that. So why is this important? Well, first of all, we talked in the introduction, we talked a little bit about attention compass. So the thing about knowledge work is that it's usually very difficult to explain to someone else how you go about doing your knowledge work. So take problem solving as an example. or the understanding kind of knowledge, the wisdom. It's taken me decades to think through various experiences and categorize them such that I know which tools to use in certain situations in those areas where I have that level of expertise, right? So you can't really describe how knowledge work is done. It's hard to describe how we remember a fact, okay, even at that factual knowledge level. And attention compass is a tool set that is intended to help us manage the information that we deal with, right? Help us collect the processes that we need to use, help us record the experiences that we have that result in this wisdom or understanding kind of knowledge. And in those ways, it even supports knowledge creation in terms of you got to understand what the state of the art is before you can create new knowledge. So if you find yourself in one of these categories, and I think most people who would listen to a podcast like this or watch videos like this would say they're probably a knowledge worker. So that's one thing. The other thing is based on, I talk a lot about Peter Drucker. So Peter Drucker was a management theorist from about 1950 until his death around the turn of the century. And he wrote 50 odd books on the subject of management. And he talked about, in fact, he coined the phrase knowledge worker as that was becoming a category of work for us in the mid 1900s. And he talked about the challenge of 21st century management, which, we're almost a quarter way through of the 21st century, and we really arguably have not solved this problem yet. So he said that the problem for the 21st century manager was going to be to increase the productivity of knowledge work. And he made the analogy to how we increase the productivity of manual labor through the first half and really onward of the 1900s, of the 20th century, right? So the first 50 years of the 20th century was all about industrialization and process creation and robot creation that replaced human physical labor. And he says, Drucker that is, says that those 50 years were very important in terms of our standard of living now, right? And how inexpensive it is to make complex products, given the current state of industrialization, the current state of, factory technology, right? With robots and lasers and all of these different modern ways we have to replace human labor. So that productivity thing is where we're going to kind of hinge here, right? So now we get to artificial intelligence, okay? And the argument that we'll consider here very briefly is the following. Is artificial intelligence a problem, or is it merely increasing the productivity of knowledge workers? Okay. So I'll give you an example. Historically, if somebody used a word you didn't understand, or there was a fact that you wanted to know, then you had to go to your bookshelf and pull down a dictionary, or you had to go to your encyclopedia set and find a subject that you thought addressed what your question was, and then read through that and figure out what was going on. And we haven't needed to do that now for well over a decade, and that's where Google comes in. And so thinking about, okay, well, Google search has really sort of, in many ways, and to a high degree, replaced human search for information. And since information is such a big input for knowledge work, the ability to find that information is huge, right? So we don't have to spend time in libraries very much. We can have that information roughly at our fingertips. Now, we still have to be good question askers, right? So, if we say, okay, well, Google really sort of replaced the need for factual knowledge workers, okay? Well, then what's the current state of the art in making these knowledge workers more productive? Well, there's this big mushy category called AI, but let's not get to that just yet, because I think there's a second level, and not in chronological order, but a second level of tooling that has allowed us to work through knowledge work, and that is computer programs. And I alluded to this earlier. So computer programs then allow us to embed some sort of non-physical process into the machine, okay? For example, formerly we needed to have a way to calculate square roots. And I remember learning a process for calculating square roots or estimating square roots back in the day. I've forgotten it now, but there used to be this thing that we would do. If somebody knows that, leave it in the comments or whatever. It'd be interesting to see it again. But now we don't need to know that, because some really smart people wrote that function so that we could press a button on a calculator and then just have that answer presented to us, right? So that is an example of a process that now has become embedded into software. And so we don't have to understand that process anymore, right? So that has since evolved from a more kind of mechanical switching thing into the software world. And if you run Windows or any modern operating system, it comes with calculator of some variety, and all you have to do is womp it up and put in 63,409 and hit the square root button, and you get an answer, right? So process knowledge is being embedded into our systems, which is some level of threat to process knowledge work, right? You can, in fact, do fairly complex tax returns in software without needing a human to intervene and present their knowledge. And so our ability to categorize the complexity and compartmentalize that into software has grown. So that's that process knowledge. Understanding kinds of knowledge, this wisdom, may be coming out in AI in the current, kind of, I don't want to say era, but in the current version of software. And so you can ask these quite open-ended questions, and the AI ChatGPT tools will give you, a reasonable answer, right? So understanding knowledge, or the understanding kind of knowledge, is often represented in papers that we write in school, right? So I'm currently teaching an MBA class, and we're using case methodology. So you read the case, and then you make a recommendation based on your knowledge and understanding of the situation, and that's really the point of the paper. And in the era of ChatGPT and other tools, we actually can get that reported to us. If somebody is a popular thinker, for example, we can ask the AI, what would Peter Drucker have to say about this situation, and start asking questions like that, and get at least some sort of answer. So then the line for me now is that AI works very well against information that's already out there, okay? And like most technology, we can only expect it to improve, right? Everybody that I'm aware of that's gone on record with the statement, AI will never do X, has been proven wrong. And so what they failed, I think, to incorporate into their thinking was that technology is in a state of constant growth, right? We don't resolve problems with technology. We embed that solution into the code or whatever. And so that really leaves us with two candidates, right, for knowledge work that really, so far, are not technologically solved, okay? And that's knowledge creation, right? I can't envision a way to create new knowledge simply by simply by having recorded all previous knowledge. There's a judgment aspect there. There's a inventive aspect, right? It's putting two old things together in a new way. The only really way I can see for technology to do that is to do it kind of randomly and then measure the result of these random combinations. Now, I'm not saying that's not possible, but I don't think it's currently represented in our information-based, computing-based tool set. I can envision a few technological challenges, but anyway, just thinking through that, and okay, well, how would that work in a situation where judgment and experience is not applied? So knowledge creation doesn't seem to be impinged on by technology at this point, which leaves us with this mysterious category of problem solving. And problem solving is fairly unique. Trial and error is part of it. Understanding what the available components there's this notion of affordances of technology, which is, okay, what results can a technology produce? And, the affordances, say, of a hammer, okay, are that it's heavy and we can easily use it as a lever, right? So that means we can break windows with it, we can hammer nails with it. It's got that curly thing on the end that we can pull things apart, kind of a crowbar affordance, right? And problem solving can be can use those affordances in very new and different ways, right? And at the end of the day, problem solving is really a quality problem in a lot of ways, right? So you can pull a screw with a hammer, okay, but it's going to break things, okay? It'd be much better and easier to use a screwdriver. If you don't have a screwdriver, then perhaps, and it's really important that the screw come out, then perhaps you just use a hammer and say, okay, well, it's close enough for what we need to do. So, as we're thinking about all these things and these different kinds of knowledge work and what might be replaced by AI and what might not, and where should we focus our efforts as knowledge workers, right? Do we embrace AI as knowledge workers? Do we let it do the dumb stuff, right? Being that I completed a Ph.D. program, I could envision a dissertation that says, literature review, right? Type this phrase into Chat GPT and read what it says, right? And here we got 5,000 words on what the current state of knowledge is, right? And then we can economize as knowledge workers. We can economize by just then reporting our new knowledge and how we derived it. So kind of a long and meandering thought, and I'm interested in this, of course, because of its applications to Attention Compass. I don't see a time when Attention Compass would incorporate AI, but my ability to predict the future is probably something below average in a human race that's not very good at it on average. So just kind of thinking through that. Now, where do we go from here, right? So we're continuing to think about how these things impact Attention Compass. If you're a knowledge worker, I suggest that you take a pretty close look at Attention Compass as your operating system, because we built it to cover as many of these different kinds of knowledge work as is possible. It's interesting in that it's a system that grows with you. You fine tune it as you use it. You develop your own, I'm going to use the term semantic web, your own mind map, if you will, of concepts. And we're working on ways to incorporate that more thoroughly into the tool set. So if you're a knowledge worker, I would argue that you need something like that. If you've already got a solution, congratulations, call me up and let me know what you're doing. If you think you've got this knowledge work problem well handled. In the meantime, we'll continue to work on these tenfold increases in productivity. And just think, regardless of where you stand on the AI question, right, whether you think it's bad for people or whether you think it's good for people, that may be the solution to Drucker's request from 1950 of a huge increase in knowledge work productivity. So just some things to think about. I appreciate you sticking in for what has turned out to be a little bit of a longer talk than I had planned. But I hope that it helps you think through these things, helps you make some decisions about maybe where to use AI, helps you think about, where you want to be on the knowledge work spectrum, and has piqued your interest in the Attention Compass tool set. So I'll be back sometime soon. And in the meantime, I hope you're having a good week and doing busy right.